I still remember the day the house went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that hums with betrayal, the kind that fills your lungs until you can't breathe. After 25 years of marriage, I thought I'd learned every tone of silence between me and Richard. But that day, the silence had a new note, cold, sharp, final. He had packed his bags the night before. I heard the soft click of the suitcase, the careful folding of shirts that I had ironed 100 times before. He didn't even bother to close the closet gently. It was as if he wanted me to hear, to prepare me for the humiliation he thought I wouldn't see coming. Richard was 63, but he had convinced himself he was 40 again. A gym membership, hair dye, and a new cologne that smelled like desperation. And her, Melissa, 32, with legs like a commercial, and a smile that said she'd never scrubbed a toilet in her life. I wasn't angry that he found someone younger. I was angry that after 25 years of building him up, healing him through his mother's death, through his failures, through his fears, he threw me away like an expired photograph. That morning, the coffee pot still brewed for two. Habit is cruel like that. When he came down the stairs, suitcase in hand, his wedding ring already gone, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply looked at him and said, "If you're leaving, at least take your lies with you." He froze, not because he felt guilty, but because he hated confrontation. Richard always wanted life to be neat, polished, pleasant. Even his betrayal came with polite manners. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. "Evelyn," he said, eyes darting to the door, "you deserve to be happy too." I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in months. And how do you suggest I do that, Richard? Should I dye my hair blonde and chase men half my age? Or maybe I'll just shrink myself until I fit into your midlife crisis. He left without a word. The door clicked shut, and with it, 25 years of my life evaporated like steam from a forgotten kettle. For 3 days I didn't eat much. The house, once warm and busy, felt like a museum of our marriage. His favorite chair, the dent in the pillow beside mine. The way his voice still echoed when I passed the hallway mirror. But on the 4th day, something in me shifted. Maybe it was the way the sunlight hit the kitchen counter that morning. Warm, stubborn, alive. Maybe it was the letter I found in his study drawer, and the one where he'd listed out our assets as if dividing furniture between friends. He'd planned it all. Even before Melissa, he wanted to keep the house, the car, and leave me with a modest allowance. That was the moment I realized. He didn't just leave me. He wanted to erase me. And I decided I would not go quietly. I called our lawyer, Mr. Harris, an old friend who owed me a favor. "I want everything," I told him, my voice steady. "Everything that's mine, and everything he thinks is his. But revenge, true revenge, isn't about taking things back. It's about making them wish they never took them from you." So I began to plan, not in rage, but in calm, deliberate silence. The kind of silence Richard had given me. Only sharper, deadlier. First, I went through our finances. Every bill, every account, every little business investment he thought I didn't know about. I had spent 25 years managing our home, our books, our taxes. Richard might have thought I was just a housewife, but I knew exactly how his empire worked, and where it leaked. Then came the social circle, the friends, the charity board, the golf club where he paraded Melissa like a prize. I didn't need to ruin him in public. I just needed to plant the truth where it would grow. When I finally stepped outside after days of planning, I wore my best navy blue dress, the one he used to love. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left and whispered, "You're not done yet." I went to the country club that Saturday, the same one where Richard and Melissa were, attending their welcome dinner as a couple. People whispered when I walked in. Some avoided eye contact. Others smiled politely, pity in their eyes. But I smiled back, gracious, calm, glowing with something they couldn't name. I went straight to the bar, ordered his favorite whiskey, and waited. When he saw me, his face froze. Melissa clung to his arm, confused. "Evelyn?" he said, voice tight. I raised my glass. "Richard, you look older." The room went silent. He tried to laugh it off, but the damage was done. People watched. Melissa blinked, unsure whether to smile or glare. "Just wanted to congratulate you," I said softly. It takes courage to trade in a lifetime for a weekend fling. Someone at the next table snorted. The whispers began. I didn't stay long, just long enough to remind him that I wasn't broken, and that the woman he'd abandoned still held her dignity like a crown. That night, when I came home, I lit a candle and sat by the window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt awake. This was no longer a story about loss. It was the beginning of my revenge, one that would be slow, elegant, and unforgettable. Because when a woman like me decides to rise, she doesn't just return, she rewrites the ending. They say grief has stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But no one tells you about the sixth stage, reinvention. After Richard left, I spent the first few weeks just existing. Morning coffee for one. Quiet dinners, the ache of hearing no footsteps behind me. I thought grief would kill me slowly, but instead, it began to carve me into something new. At 68, most people expect you to fade into the background, to knit blankets, bake cookies, and talk about grandchildren. I had none of those things. My only child, Anna, had passed away 15 years ago in a car accident. Losing her had already shattered me once. Losing Richard was simply the echo of that heartbreak. But maybe that's why I didn't break this time. You can't destroy a woman who has already crawled through fire. I started walking every morning at sunrise. The neighborhood was still quiet then. Just me, the birds, and the smell of dew on the pavement. At first, it was just a way to keep from crying, but slowly I started to feel alive again. My legs stronger, my breath deeper, my thoughts sharper. Then one morning, I passed by a for lease sign in front of a small corner cafe. Old brick, dusty windows, the kind of place that looked like it once had stories to tell. The owner, an older man named Ben, was sweeping the porch. "You thinking of renting?" he asked when he saw me looking. "I'm thinking of living," I said before I even knew what that meant. And that's how it began. Within 2 weeks, I'd signed the lease. My savings weren't massive, but I had enough to start small, to create something of my own for the first time in decades. I named it Evelyn's Garden, a little cafe filled with flowers, books, and quiet corners, a place for people like me, the ones rebuilding themselves after life fell apart. At first, people came out of curiosity. "Isn't that Richard Mason's ex-wife?" they whispered. But then they stayed, for the warmth, the coffee, the feeling that someone saw them. And every day I worked, hands deep in flour, heart wide open. And here's the thing about building something from scratch. It gives you back everything they tried to take from you. Word spread fast. The cafe became popular, especially among women. Divorced, widowed, tired. They found comfort in my little space. I started hosting Sunday stories, where people could share pieces of their lives, laughter and tears mixed with the smell of cinnamon and coffee beans. Then, one afternoon, as I was arranging roses by the window, I saw him, Richard, standing across the street, hands in his pockets, watching through the glass. For a second, my heart stopped, not from love, but from the power shift. He walked in like a man who didn't know where he belonged. "Evelyn," he said softly, looking around. "This place, it's beautiful." "Thank you," I said without looking up. "It was built from the ashes of my marriage." He flinched but smiled weakly. "You look good. Better than I've seen you in years." "Freedom does that," I replied. He hesitated, then sighed. "Melissa left." I almost laughed. Of course she did. He looked older, smaller somehow. The charm that once drew people to him had thinned into regret. She said I wasn't exciting enough, that I didn't have ambition anymore. And what did you expect, Richard? She wanted the thrill of stealing a married man, not the boredom of keeping him. He looked at me then, really looked. I made a mistake. I set down the flowers and met his gaze. "No, Richard, you made a choice. Mistakes are accidents. You planned yours." He swallowed hard, glancing around as customers began to notice him. "Can we talk? Maybe over dinner?" I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from peace, not pity. "I'm sorry, Richard. I have plans tonight. I'm meeting someone who values me. His eyes widened slightly. You're seeing someone? Maybe. Maybe not. I leaned closer and whispered, but either way, it's none of your business anymore. That night, I did meet someone. Not a man, but myself. I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window of my apartment above the cafe, and looked at the stars. I realized how beautiful the world looked when you stopped begging someone to see you. In the following months, business grew. Local magazines wrote about the Widow Cafe that became a symbol of hope. Women brought flowers, left notes, shared laughter. I hired a young barista, Clara, just 24, full of fire. She reminded me of who I once was. One evening while we were closing, she asked, "Miss Evelyn, how did you do it? After everything? How did you move on?" I smiled at her reflection in the window, by remembering that survival is the loudest revenge. But fate, it seems, wasn't done yet. One morning I received a letter, legal, stiff, printed on expensive paper. Richard's name at the bottom. He was filing for financial reassessment. Apparently he wanted a share of the cafe profits. He had the nerve to claim that since I'd used our joint funds to start it, he deserved half. I stared at the paper for a long time, then began to laugh. A deep, shaking laugh that scared even me. "Oh, Richard, you just couldn't stand to see me rise, could you?" I poured myself coffee, sat down, and began to plan my next move. The kind that doesn't just destroy a man, but teaches him what true loss feels like. This time, I wouldn't just defend what was mine. I would take back what he stole, dignity, peace, and the power to make him irrelevant. Because revenge, when done right, doesn't look like hate. It looks like success in slow motion. The morning the legal letter arrived, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised. I'd spent 25 years married to Richard Mason, the man who believed charm was currency and decency was optional. Of course he would come for me when he realized I'd built something he couldn't control. But this time, I wasn't the same woman who had waited at the window for him to come home. I wasn't his audience anymore. I made myself coffee, sat at my oak table, and reread the letter, every polished, condescending word. He claims joint ownership of the cafe due to shared marital assets. Joint ownership. The phrase made me laugh out loud. He hadn't lifted a finger to build that place. He hadn't smelled of flour or coffee beans, hadn't stayed up painting walls or scrubbing secondhand tables. But in his mind, he still believed he was entitled to every piece of my life, even after he left it. Fine, I thought. If he wants a game, I'll play it. But I'll choose the rules. That afternoon, I called my lawyer, Mr. Harris. He was in his late 70s now. A kind man with sharp instincts and a fondness for bourbon. "Evelyn," he said, flipping through the papers. "He's grasping at straws. Legally, you're safe. But men like Richard, they don't stop because of logic. They stop when it hurts to continue. Then let's make it hurt," I said quietly. We filed a countersuit, not out of greed but precision. I claimed damages for emotional distress and public humiliation, backed by years of documented neglect and financial secrecy. I knew where his skeletons were buried, the consulting fees, the shell company he'd opened, to hide money from taxes, the mistress vacations disguised as business trips. When I was his wife, I'd stayed silent to keep our home intact. Now my silence was over. Mr. Harris smiled when I handed him the folder of proof. "You always were sharper than people realized." "I just finally stopped pretending not to be," I said. Within weeks, Richard's tone shifted. The confident, smug emails turned cautious. His lawyer requested amicable discussions. But I wasn't interested in amicable. I was interested in truth. The first court hearing was surreal. I walked into the courthouse wearing a cream suit and pearls, not as his ex-wife, but as a woman who'd rebuilt her kingdom. Melissa wasn't there. Word had it she'd run off to California with a yoga instructor. Richard, though, was there, older, thinner, his once proud posture slouched with embarrassment. He tried to meet my eyes, but I didn't let him. I wasn't there to acknowledge him. I was there to outlive him. When my turn came to speak, I stood tall and told the judge everything. Not as a victim, but as a witness to my own rebirth. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to ensure that when a man throws away his partner of 25 years, He doesn't also get to keep her silence. The courtroom was quiet when I finished. Even the judge looked at me differently, not with pity, but respect. The case stretched for months. Meanwhile, Evelyn's garden kept blooming. Local newspapers picked up the story. Abandoned wife builds cafe empire. From heartbreak to hope, how one woman reclaimed her life. I didn't ask for attention, but it came anyway. People love stories of resurrection, and I gave them one. Behind the scenes, Richard's life was unraveling. His company, once thriving, began losing clients after. Whispers of financial irregularities spread. I hadn't leaked anything. Truth has a way of finding light all on its own. One afternoon, I was closing up the cafe when Clara, my young barista, handed me a newspaper. On the front page, Richard Mason under investigation for fraud allegations. I stared at it for a long time, not with satisfaction, but with peace. The world had simply balanced itself. That night, I poured a glass of red wine, turned on some Billie Holiday, and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered, reflected in my glass like small pieces of redemption. I realized something then. Revenge wasn't about watching him fall. It was about rising so high that his memory couldn't reach me anymore. Still, fate had one more surprise. A week later, he showed up at my cafe again. Alone this time. No swagger, no charm. Just a man who'd finally met the consequences of his own choices. "Evelyn," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Can we talk, please?" I gestured to a table in the corner. 5 minutes. He sat down looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I lost everything," he said. "The business, the house, the friends, even Melissa. I didn't realize—" I stopped him. "You didn't realize because you never looked, Richard. You thought love was something to own. You never learned that love is something to build." He stared at me, eyes glassy. "Do you ever miss me?" I took a deep breath. "I miss the woman I was before you made me doubt her. But her, she's back now, and she doesn't miss you." He nodded, stood up slowly, and left without another word. When the door closed behind him, I felt no triumph, just clarity. Some endings don't need applause. They just need peace. I went upstairs that evening and opened the journal I'd been keeping since the day he left. I wrote one sentence. He took 25 years of my life, but I took back eternity. And for the first time in a very long time, I slept soundly. But life has a way of testing even the strongest souls. Because the very next morning, a stranger walked into my cafe. Tall, kind eyes, holding a newspaper with my face on it. He smiled and said, "I read your story. You're remarkable." And in that moment, I realized maybe this story wasn't about revenge after all. Maybe it was about beginning again. The stranger's name was Michael. He was a writer for a lifestyle magazine. The kind of person who noticed the small details. The way I arranged flowers in the cafe. How I smiled at children passing by. And the pride I carried in my posture. "You've built something extraordinary," he said, eyes scanning the space. "After everything, you look unstoppable." I laughed softly. Unstoppable? Maybe, or maybe just stubborn. Michael stayed that afternoon, asking questions about the cafe, my life, and the story behind my success. And as he listened, I realized something. Telling my story wasn't about reliving the pain. It was about showing the world that I survived it, and survived beautifully. After he left, I felt lighter. Each word spoken aloud had stripped away another layer of the shame Richard had tried to plant in me. I was not the woman he left behind. I was a phoenix, standing tall amid the ashes of a life I refused to let him ruin. Business at the cafe flourished. Women from all over the town came, inspired by the story they'd read. They asked me questions, shared their heartbreaks, and I offered them guidance and a listening ear. I had become more than just a cafe owner. I had become a symbol of resilience. Richard, of course, had not given up. Emails came regularly, dripping with desperation and thinly veiled anger. "Evelyn," one read, "please reconsider. Let's negotiate. We can come to an agreement." I saved them all in a folder marked evidence. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The law, the public, and my own moral compass were my allies. One evening, the town's annual charity gala came around. It was the same gala Richard and Melissa had attended in the past, and I knew he would be there. I arrived in a deep green gown, hair perfectly styled. and walked into the hall with calm confidence. Whispers followed me, some admiring, some envious, but I didn't care. This night was mine. Richard saw me from across the room. His jaw tightened, his posture stiffened, and I knew he recognized the woman he had underestimated. The whispers of the crowd grew louder as people noticed us. Melissa was not there. She had vanished, as she often did when reality didn't match her expectations. Richard attempted a greeting, a forced smile that failed. I nodded politely, acknowledging him with the courtesy he hadn't earned but respecting myself enough to maintain dignity. Throughout the night, I mingled with the community, laughed freely, and made connections that were genuinely mine, not dictated by marriage, wealth, or social standing. People approached me, praising the cafe, the story of resilience, and the power I seemed to radiate. Richard tried to follow, to insert himself into conversations, but it was futile. I had built a life that could not be overshadowed by him. Later, as I left the gala, Michael found me by the fountain outside. "You were incredible tonight," he said, offering his arm. "How do you stay so composed?" "Composure," I said, "is learned when you survive storms that would sink others." Michael smiled, and for the first time, I considered that life could offer joy without the shadow of betrayal. Days turned into weeks, and Richard's efforts to challenge my cafe legally grew desperate but ineffective. Every attempt was countered with evidence, witnesses, and a firm stance that reminded him he no longer held power over me. I began writing in my journal again, not just about revenge or the past, but about the new life I was building. The cafe, the friendships, the small victories, they filled my pages with hope, purpose, and fulfillment. One morning, while reviewing the books at the cafe, I noticed an envelope slipped under the door. My name was written in familiar handwriting, Richard. Inside a single note, "I see now what I lost. You are everything I thought I had under control. I am sorry." I folded it slowly, placing it in my journal. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt peace. Some people might have wanted revenge after reading that, but I didn't. Revenge had already taken its course, not by my hatred, but by my growth, my success, and my unwavering dignity. That afternoon, Michael asked me about the letter. I showed it to him, smiling. Some apologies don't need a response. They're just reminders that the past doesn't control the future. He nodded, writing diligently in his notebook. "You're remarkable, Evelyn. Truly remarkable." By now, my cafe had become more than a business. It was a sanctuary, a place where heartbreak could be transformed into hope. And I realized that true revenge wasn't about hurting someone else. It was about becoming so powerful, so fulfilled, and so unapologetically yourself that they realize their absence can never diminish you. Richard was no longer a shadow over my life. He was a ghost, a faint memory of a time when I didn't know my own strength. And strength, I discovered, wasn't loud. It didn't need recognition. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed quietly and powerfully, in every decision I made, every smile I shared, and every corner of the cafe I had built with my own hands. That night I closed the cafe, walking home under the glow of streetlights. The air smelled of autumn, crisp and refreshing. I felt free, truly free. As I looked back at the cafe, now glowing warmly in the evening, I whispered to myself, "This is mine. Everything I lost, I found again. Everything he tried to take, he can never touch." And in that moment, I understood that revenge wasn't about him at all. It was about me, reclaiming my life, my joy, and my power. Because sometimes, the most unforgettable revenge is living better than they ever imagined you could. Life after Richard had taken an unexpected rhythm, one I could finally call my own. Each morning, I woke to the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread from Evelyn's garden. The cafe had become more than a business. It was my fortress, my sanctuary, a place where my past couldn't touch me. Michael had become a constant presence in my life, though never in a way that demanded anything from me. He documented my story for the magazine. Yes, but more than that, he became a witness to my rebirth. Sitting with him over late-night cups of tea, I would talk about Richard, the betrayal, the anger, and yet somehow it felt like that anger was slowly evaporating. Richard's letters had stopped coming. Perhaps he realized I had moved beyond him, or perhaps the law had finally shown him that control was no longer possible. Either way, I did not miss him. I did not want him. And yet, there was a lingering part of me that understood why he tried. Not because he loved me, but because he feared me. Fear is a powerful motivator. People fear the things they cannot control, and I had become uncontrollable. One evening, while closing the cafe, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street. It was old and sleek, unmistakably Richard. He got out slowly, his head bowed, hands deep in his pockets. I didn't panic. I didn't even pause. I continued arranging flowers, glancing occasionally at him through the window. Finally, he approached. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" I walked out to meet him halfway, standing tall, unshaken. "You have 5 minutes," I said. He took a deep breath. "I've lost everything," he admitted. "The company, the house, Melissa, and I've realized I took you for granted. You were never just a wife. You were everything." I listened quietly. This wasn't new information, but hearing him say it aloud made me feel the weight of my own power. "You were blind," I said softly. "You thought I needed you. I didn't. I needed respect, partnership, love, not theft and betrayal." Richard winced, and for a moment I could almost pity him. But I didn't. Pity is a luxury for those who have never been trampled. "You've built something extraordinary," he continued. "I see it now, and I see you." I smiled faintly. It took losing everything for me to find myself. "That's a lesson you'll never understand, Richard." He nodded slowly, as though accepting the truth of it. "I don't deserve you." "No," I said. "You don't." And that was the final word. He turned and walked away, disappearing down the street, leaving me standing there with the quiet triumph of survival. That night, I returned to the cafe and lit a single candle by the window. I sat with my journal and wrote, "Some battles are not fought with fists or words, but with life itself. I am living proof that the strongest revenge is the one that does not demand confrontation, but does not forgive betrayal either." From that moment on, my life became a series of intentional choices. I expanded the cafe, hired women who needed a second chance, and turned the small space into a community hub. We hosted book readings, charity drives, and mentorship programs for young women in business. Evelyn's Garden became not just my sanctuary, but a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt powerless. Michael continued to document my journey. His articles gained attention nationally, bringing even more visitors to the cafe. He often looked at me and said, "You've turned heartbreak into a legacy." I nodded. I had. But the real victory was personal. Every morning I woke with peace in my heart. Every evening, I fell asleep knowing that I had reclaimed every part of my life that Richard had tried to destroy. And there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he could see me thriving, though he was no longer a part of it. His absence, once painful, had become a source of my strength. Because revenge, I realized fully, is not about public humiliation or vindictive actions. It is about living in such a way that the person who tried to diminish you can no longer have any power over your life. One day, as I watched the sun set over the cafe garden, Michael asked me, "Do you ever think about him?" I paused, taking a deep breath of the autumn air. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but only to remember how far I've come. He's a shadow of a past I survived, and shadows have no weight in the light." That night, I wrote the last line of my journal entry for the week. "I am no longer a wife abandoned, nor a victim betrayed. I am Evelyn, whole, fearless, unstoppable." The cafe hummed quietly around me. The clink of cups, the soft laughter of women sharing stories, the aroma of coffee and fresh bread. Life, I realized, was no longer about Richard. It was about me, my choices, my freedom. And as I looked out at the glowing streets, I knew one thing for certain: my revenge was complete. Not because he had suffered, but because I had risen, higher, stronger, and infinitely more alive than I had ever been. Evelyn's Garden was more than a cafe now. It was a testament, a monument to resilience, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, a woman can reclaim everything she thought she lost. And as I closed the cafe doors that night, I whispered to myself, "Let the past rest. I am free, I am powerful, and I am finally home in my own life." After Richard's final departure, life at Evelyn's Garden settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and exhilarating. The cafe had become a hub of laughter, stories, and quiet victories. People came for the coffee, yes, but they stayed for the spirit of the place. The way it seemed to whisper, "You can survive and you can thrive." I never expected how much influence a single life could have. Word of my story traveled far beyond the neighborhood. Women from neighboring towns came, seeking advice, mentorship, or simply a safe space. They reminded me of something important. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been doubted, abandoned, or underestimated. One rainy afternoon, as I wiped down the counter, a woman in her 40s entered hesitantly. She had tired eyes and a nervous energy, clutching a folder like it was a shield. I read about your cafe," she began, "and your story. I don't even know where to start, but I think you could help me." I smiled warmly. "Start anywhere. There's always a place to begin." Her name was Laura. She had left an abusive marriage and was struggling to rebuild her life. Over the next few weeks, she came every day, helping in the kitchen, organizing events, and learning to find her own strength. Watching her grow reminded me so much of myself, of the long journey from despair to power. Meanwhile, Richard tried in subtle ways to insert himself back into my life. Not openly, no, he had learned the hard way that I would never tolerate intrusion. Instead, he sent indirect messages through mutual acquaintances, hoping to gauge my reaction. One evening, I received a call from a former mutual friend. "Evelyn, you need to know," she said hesitantly. "Richard is talking about the cafe. He's bragging about how he thinks he can still influence you." I laughed quietly. "Let him. The only influence he has now is how amusingly small he looks from a distance." It wasn't anger that filled me. It was clarity. The more I grew, the more powerless he became. Every step I took forward reminded me that my life was untouchable to those who had once tried to control it. Months passed. Evelyn's garden became not just a cafe, but a community center. I organized workshops on financial independence, self-esteem, and leadership for women of all ages. I invited speakers, hosted book clubs, and created programs for young women dreaming of starting their own businesses. Each initiative became a ripple, one act of empowerment inspiring countless others. Richard by now had lost nearly everything. His company struggled under the weight of mismanagement and public scrutiny. People who had once admired him began to whisper about his downfall. And all the while he watched, powerless, as I flourished. One evening, as I was closing the cafe, Michael approached with a small envelope in his hand. "Evelyn," he said, a mischievous smile on his face, "you might want to see this." I opened it to find a handwritten note from Richard. Only a few lines, but they spoke volumes. "You've won. I see now that all my efforts to control you were meaningless. I underestimated your strength. You are untouchable." I folded the note carefully and placed it in my journal. There was no triumph in tearing it apart, no gloating. It was simply acknowledgement of a truth he could not escape. I had risen above him, entirely on my own terms. The next morning, as I prepared the cafe for another busy day, Clara handed me a small package. Inside was a beautiful handcrafted journal with a note. "For the woman who inspires others to rise, someone who believes in you." I held it close, feeling the warmth of recognition. Not from Richard, not from the past, but from the life I had rebuilt, the people I had touched, and the woman I had become. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at the cafe. Women from different walks of life shared their stories of heartbreak, perseverance, and triumph. Each tale reminded me of how far we all could rise when we refused to let betrayal define us. And for the first time, I realized that true revenge had nothing to do with Richard. It was not about humiliation, lawsuits, or letters. True revenge was life itself, thriving, building, and becoming a beacon for others. By the time I locked the doors that night, I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. Richard was irrelevant. The past was a shadow. My future was mine, bright, bold, and full of promise. And as I looked out over the softly lit cafe garden, I whispered to myself, "Let the world watch. Let them see. I am no longer defined by what I lost, but by everything I have become." From that day on, I realized something profound. Revenge does not need to be loud. bitter or dramatic. The most powerful revenge is living well, thriving, and building a life they cannot touch, replicate, or diminish. And so I continued. Evelyn's garden continued. And in every cup of coffee, every smile shared, and every life touched, I felt the quiet, unstoppable victory that comes from rising stronger than anyone ever expected. By now, Evelyn's garden had become more than a cafe. It was a symbol. People came not just for the coffee, but for the warmth, the guidance, and the quiet confidence that radiated from me. Every day reminded me that life after betrayal could be rich, full and beautiful, if only you had the courage to claim it. One late afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the cafe windows, a man entered. He was older, dressed in a tailored suit, and carried an air of quiet authority. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on me. "Miss Evelyn?" he asked. I nodded cautiously. "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Thomas Caldwell," he said, extending his hand. "I work with a foundation that supports women entrepreneurs. I've been following your story, and I think your work here, it's remarkable. I'd like to help you expand." I paused. Expansion. That word carried weight. Until now, I had focused on rebuilding, nurturing the cafe, and empowering those around me. Growth on a larger scale had been a distant dream. And now, here was an opportunity, one that promised a wider reach and greater impact. "Tell me more," I said, curiosity piqued. Thomas smiled. "We provide funding, mentorship, and connections for women-led businesses. We want to help your cafe become a model for communities nationwide. A place where women can heal, learn, and thrive." I considered this carefully. Accepting meant stepping even further into the spotlight, exposing myself to scrutiny and potentially the risks of public attention. But it also meant amplifying the work I had fought so hard to build. "I'm interested," I said finally. "But there's one condition. Everything must remain true to the spirit of Evelyn's garden. It's not about money, it's about people." He nodded. "Absolutely. That's why we approached you." That evening after the meeting, I sat alone in the cafe, reflecting on how far I had come. Expansion meant influence, and influence meant power, the kind Richard had once sought through manipulation and charm. But now, power was mine, earned through resilience, wisdom, and integrity. As I prepared to close, Clara handed me a note. It was from Laura, my mentee, who had grown more confident with each passing week. "Miss Evelyn, you've changed my life. I never thought I could survive, let alone thrive. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like." I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from profound fulfillment. This ripple effect was the real reward. Later that week, a legal notice arrived. Richard had attempted to appeal the earlier settlement regarding the cafe. His lawyer's tone was polite, but desperate. He wanted another chance. I read it, then smiled. My lawyer and I responded promptly, firmly, strategically, and decisively. Richard had no leverage, no control, and no sway over the life I had built. A few days later, I received an unexpected message. It was from one of Richard's former colleagues. "He's in trouble. Financial investigations are intensifying. You've really outplayed him." I laughed quietly, setting the note aside. Outplayed, perhaps, but my true satisfaction came not from seeing him stumble, but from realizing how untouchable I had become. The expansion plan with Thomas continued. Together, we developed programs to teach women business skills, financial literacy, and emotional resilience. Evelyn's Garden became a franchise, each location designed to foster healing, empowerment, and independence. One evening, during a small celebration for our first new location, Michael leaned over and whispered, "You've gone from survivor to leader. You're building a legacy." I looked around at the smiling faces, the laughter, and the energy of women finding themselves, and nodded. A legacy, yes, but one built not on revenge, but on life, on thriving where others once tried to see me fall. And then, unexpectedly, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. Richard. He approached quietly, hesitant, as if stepping into a world that no longer belonged to him. His eyes met mine, and I saw the remnants of the man I once knew. Arrogance replaced with regret. Confidence replaced with humility. "Evelyn," he said softly, I see now. I was wrong. You've built something incredible. I can't take it from you. I never could." I studied him for a long moment and then smiled. A genuine warm smile. "No, Richard. You never could, and you never will. Because this life, this legacy, it's mine." He nodded slowly, accepting the truth. There was no anger left in me, no desire for retribution. My victory had been quiet, complete, and powerful. Later that night, as I closed the doors of the cafe, I reflected on everything: betrayal, heartbreak, loss, and ultimately resurrection. Every step of the journey had been hard, but each had led me here, to strength, dignity, and freedom. I realized that the most unforgettable revenge isn't in words, lawsuits, or confrontations. It's in becoming a life that cannot be overshadowed, silenced, or diminished. And as I looked at the night sky, stars glimmering like tiny promises of hope, I whispered to myself, "Let the past rest. I am whole. I am unstoppable. And I will continue to rise not for anyone else but for me." Months had passed since Richard's last appearance at the cafe. Life had grown even brighter. The expansion with Thomas had begun. Evelyn's garden franchises were thriving. And the community of women I mentored had blossomed into something extraordinary. I had finally stopped thinking about Richard most days. He was a memory, a ghost of a life I no longer needed. But fate, it seems, enjoys testing those who rise. One afternoon, a letter arrived, thick, formal, and urgent. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Richard's lawyer. My first instinct was to toss it aside, but curiosity and the thrill of facing the final remnants of that chapter made me open it. It was a summons for a court mediation. He wanted one last meeting, claiming new evidence of financial entanglements, trying to reclaim something from me that he could no longer touch. I smiled. Let him come. I had spent months preparing for this, meticulously gathering every document, every proof, every witness who could demonstrate that the cafe, its expansion, and its success were entirely my work. The day of the mediation, I arrived early. My team, Thomas and Mr. Harris, were with me, calm, professional, prepared. Richard arrived later, looking smaller than ever. Gone was the confident swagger, replaced with visible unease. When the mediator asked for opening statements, I spoke clearly, deliberately. "Your Honor," I began, "this case is not about money. It's about ownership of my life, my work, and my accomplishments. Every decision, every risk, every success was mine. The defendant had no part in it. What remains now is only the recognition of a fact. I am independent, untouchable, and my work stands on its own merit." Richard's lawyer sputtered, but there was no room for argument. The evidence was overwhelming. The bank statements, the contracts, the meticulous records of labor, investment, and planning. Richard had no leverage. The mediator finally looked at him. "Do you wish to settle or pursue this further?" Richard hesitated. He looked at me, searching for some flicker of emotion, anger, fear, regret. I gave him none, only calm strength. I wish to withdraw," he said quietly. The room went silent. I remained seated, serene, letting the truth sink in. As we left the courthouse, Thomas remarked, "You've just closed the final door on that chapter." I nodded, and walked out stronger than ever. That evening, back at the cafe, I poured a glass of wine and sat in my favorite chair. Michael joined me, notebook in hand. "You've done it," he said. "He's gone. Legally, emotionally, everything." I smiled. "He's been gone for a long time, Michael. I was just waiting for the world to catch up, and that was the truth. My real revenge had never been about proving him wrong, humiliating him, or forcing an apology. It was about rising so completely, so beautifully, that he could no longer influence the story of my life." Clara brought over fresh pastries. Laura arrived to share news of her first successful business meeting, and the cafe hummed with life, laughter, conversation, and quiet victories. I looked around and realized something profound. My power was not in confrontation. It was in creation, creating life, joy, hope, and legacy. Weeks later, Richard attempted one final gesture. A letter, handwritten, arrived at the cafe. I read it carefully. "Evelyn, I see now the magnitude of what I lost. You've surpassed everything I ever imagined. I am sorry, and I am humbled. Truly." I folded it, set it aside, and whispered softly. You taught me the lesson I needed, but your place in my life is finished. That night, I stood by the cafe window, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and pink. I realized revenge is not about retaliation. It is about power reclaimed, dignity restored, and life rebuilt on your own terms. Evelyn's garden had become more than a cafe. It was a symbol, proof that a woman could rise from heartbreak, betrayal, and loss to create a life that no one could touch, erase, or diminish. And as I closed the doors, walking through the soft glow of the streetlights, I felt the final weight of the past lift. I was free. I was whole. I was unstoppable. By now, Evelyn's garden had become a household name, not just a cafe, but a sanctuary for those seeking hope, guidance, and a place to start over. Every day, I watched women arrive with heavy hearts, leave with lighter ones. It was a transformation I had once only dreamed of achieving for myself. The expansion with Thomas had gone beyond what I imagined. Franchises opened in neighboring cities, each reflecting the spirit of the original cafe: warmth, empowerment, and independence. And with every new location, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. This was my revenge, my proof that a life rebuilt with integrity, passion, and courage could not be overshadowed by anyone who tried to destroy it. One afternoon, a letter arrived from an unexpected source, a national business magazine. They wanted to feature me, not as a survivor of betrayal, but as a model of empowerment. I read the draft and a smile spread across my face. Every word reflected exactly what I had become: a woman who had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and humiliation, yet emerged not bitter, but stronger, not defined by the loss, but by the life she rebuilt. Later that day, Clara and Laura helped me prepare the cafe for a special event. We were hosting a mentorship evening for women entrepreneurs. The air buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the subtle aroma of cinnamon and fresh pastries. I looked around at the crowd, each face reflecting courage, hope, and determination. And in that moment, I understood fully what my life had become. It wasn't about Richard. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about every woman who ever felt powerless. It was about creating a space where their stories mattered, their voices were heard, and their potential could flourish. As I spoke to the gathering that evening, I shared a simple truth. Betrayal, heartbreak, and loss are not the end. They are a beginning that gives you the chance to rise higher than you ever imagined. True power comes not from seeking revenge, but from creating a life so full and meaningful that no one can take it from you. Applause filled the room, but I hardly noticed. My eyes scanned the faces of women who had been through struggles I knew all too well. Their smiles, their tears, their quiet nods of understanding. That was my real victory. That night, after everyone had left, I sat quietly in the cafe, sipping tea. The city outside twinkled with lights, and I felt a profound sense of peace. For years, I had allowed myself to be defined by others' actions. Now I was defining my own life, my own legacy. Then a familiar figure appeared at the door. Richard. He was older, humbler, more worn than I remembered. No swagger, no charm. Just a man finally facing the consequences of his choices. Evelyn, he said quietly, almost reverently. I don't know why I'm here. I just wanted to see, to understand. I gestured for him to sit, curiosity flickering within me. He looked around, eyes scanning the cafe, lingering on women laughing, sharing, thriving. You've built everything I tried to destroy, he admitted. And I see now, I never had control. You're incredible. I nodded. Thank you for acknowledging it. But your presence here isn't necessary. This life, this legacy isn't for you. It's mine, and it always will be. He remained silent, and I could see the weight of understanding settling upon him. No apology could undo the past, and no gesture could diminish the life I had created. Finally, he stood and said, I'm proud of you, truly. I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. Then leave knowing that I've outgrown the past, and that I'm finally free. As he walked out, I realized something profound. The last remnants of betrayal were gone. The pain, the anger, the humiliation, all of it had been transformed into strength, purpose, and resilience. I turned back to the cafe, to the warm glow of the lights, the aroma of coffee, and the hum of life that I had nurtured. This was my revenge, my victory, and my legacy. No confrontation, no hatred. Just life, thriving, beautiful, unstoppable life. And as I looked around, I whispered softly to myself, "Let the past rest. Let the world see. I am whole, I am powerful, and I am finally home in my own life." The sun was just beginning to set, casting golden hues across Evelyn's garden. The cafe had become more than a place. It was a living, breathing testament to resilience, hope, and rebirth. Women came not only for coffee, but to feel strength, to witness a life rebuilt from heartbreak. I stood behind the counter, hands resting lightly on the polished wood, and allowed myself a moment of reflection. 68 years of life, filled with love, loss, and betrayal, had led me here. And for the first time, I felt fully, completely home in myself. It hadn't been easy. There had been nights of despair, mornings of emptiness, and moments when I questioned if I could ever reclaim my life. But each step forward, each cup of coffee served with care, each story shared within these walls, had reminded me that I was never powerless, only patient. The cafe door chimed, and I looked up. Clara and Laura were helping a young woman find her place among the other patrons. She was shy, hesitant, like many had been before discovering Evelyn's garden. I offered her a gentle smile. "Welcome," I said softly. "You're safe here. You're seen. You're heard." Her eyes brightened and she nodded, a spark of hope flickering where doubt had once lived. I returned to my own table, Michael by my side. He had become a constant companion. Not in the romantic sense, though I admit his presence was comforting, but as someone who understood the weight of my story, who had witnessed my journey from despair to empowerment. "You've created something extraordinary," he said, eyes scanning the bustling cafe. "Not just a business, not just a legacy, a movement." I smiled, letting the truth of it sink in. "It's never about revenge," I said quietly. "Revenge is hollow if it only seeks to hurt. True victory is building a life so strong, so beautiful, and so unstoppable that anyone who tried to take it from you becomes irrelevant." The truth of my words echoed in my heart. Richard was gone from my life, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. He could see the life I had built, the power I had reclaimed, but it no longer mattered. His absence had allowed me to grow into someone he could never control, never diminish, and never define. Even when legal papers had crossed my desk, threatening to drag me back into the past, I had remained calm. I knew my strength lay not in confrontation, but in steadfast persistence. Each decision I made, every program launched, every woman I mentored, had been a quiet but unstoppable form of revenge. And now, as I looked around the cafe, the laughter, the conversations, the sense of belonging, I understood that revenge had taken its most beautiful form. It had become life itself. Later that evening, after closing, I stepped outside. The city streets were calm, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of decades lift from my shoulders. I thought of Richard one last time. He had written, he had apologized, he had acknowledged my strength, but I no longer needed his validation. I had validation in every cup of coffee, in every smile, in every life touched by the work I had done. I walked to the garden behind the cafe, where small lanterns flickered against the darkening sky. I knelt and ran my hands over the soil, imagining each plant as a chapter of my life. Roots deep, resilient, reaching toward light no storm could dim. And I whispered softly, as I had learned to do in moments of reflection, "I am whole. I am free. I am stronger than I ever knew. The past has shaped me, but it does not define me. I am Evelyn, unstoppable, unshakable, and finally home." That night, I returned inside and poured a glass of wine. Michael joined me, and together we watched the quiet hum of the cafe, alive with memories, victories, and new beginnings. I realized then that the story of betrayal, heartbreak, and revenge had transformed into a story of empowerment, resilience, and hope. And that was a story worth telling, not just to the world, but to myself. Because in the end, the most unforgettable revenge is a life fully reclaimed, lived beautifully and untouchably. I closed my journal, a soft smile on my lips. Evelyn's garden would continue to bloom, just as I would continue to thrive. A life built not on what I had lost, but on everything I had gained. And in the quiet glow of the cafe, I finally understood. I am home. And this time, I am here to stay.